We are gonna pick back up S94, which now also contains S35 and H10, as well as last year's H something that I don't remember the number of, but I'm sure someone does, like Becky, and it doesn't matter. And then David has some amendments that Catherine and I worked with him on, and also includes the other suggestions that folks had last time we went through the language. And so we're gonna talk through that. If you could, please, David.
All right. So the document is draft 4 point, David Hall, Legislative Council. The document is posted on your page under Becky's name right now. It's a draft 4.1 amendment to S94. I don't see that I have a link to join a Zoom and share the screen, so I can just talk you through it and we can look at it together, or?
I can resend it. That would be great.
So I was I with you? I was on Zoom. I didn't think there
You're
were,
inside the screen, yeah.
so I was in the ether when Becky was doing her part. So I don't know if you generally have any questions for my stuff, and we could look at the specific language, obviously, but my stuff all has to do with veggie and the veggie operation and the studies, so.
So does anyone have anything before we get to those parts? Okay, great.
Right.
Then David.
Okay. So I am zooming in.
And it's okay for us to just sit here for 60 seconds while you log on. We don't even need to.
Okay. So
Make that larger. That would
yep,
enable me to see it.
is that better?
That's lovely, thank you.
So the changes relative to the last time I saw you are highlighted in yellow. And the first one is the top of page 4. So we're talking about VEPSI itself and when it goes into executive session. And you had already said, don't go into executive session to consider the veggie program applications unless the executive branch state economist is present and has been provided all relevant materials concerning the session.
And by you mean the Commerce Committee
I mean, well,
and the body or whatever, but I'm just trying to be clear. That language came over from Commerce, right?
fair enough, yes.
Okay,
Yes,
I just want to make sure I'm remembering right and we didn't do something I forgot.
that is correct.
Okay, great.
So this addition with subdivision B, the auditor of accounts may attend an executive session of the council. It is not specific to Vermont Employment Growth Incentive under subchapter 2 as the previous subdivision is. It could include other executive sessions, whether it's a TIF application or something else. So it's up to you whether you want to narrow the scope of the auditor's ability to attend executive sessions. Right now, under current law, 1 VSA 313, executive session is available to members of the council and then to people who are invited, basically. So, if the auditor weren't invited, the auditor doesn't have some separate authority under law to be able to drop in on executive session of VEPSI. So this would give the auditor that authority. And again, the way it's written, because I didn't know if you wanted it to be limited just to veggie applications or broader.
I would probably, not to be nitpicky, move it up to the section that's about VEPSI broadly. But this was, it seemed like there was a difference of opinion from various witnesses about whether the auditor used to be able to come and now can't come or could come, or it just seemed like, given the difference of opinion on reality, it's nice to put some reality into statute.
So
Yeah.
how much input is the auditor gonna have if he's allowed to attend? Will he have a voting voice or just attend?
He doesn't become a member of VEPC.
Right.
He's just able to
He can sit
be
in.
present, and I guess it would be up to them if he was allowed to ask some questions or anything else, but he'd be allowed to participate, be present at the meeting, attend session.
And these are, these meetings he would, or they, the auditor would know about in advance and know that they're going to go into executive session to discuss an application and therefore make himself present if he's interested. I mean, because does he know when they're going to go into executive session, I guess is my question.
I don't know. That would be, I mean, so they would have to vote to go into executive session in the context of a meeting, right? So if they were having a meeting in April to discuss applications that have come in to that point, there would be a warned council meeting, it would be public. And then there could be a part of that time where they're gonna go into executive session to discuss, proprietary information of some sort. They'd have to tell everybody, we're gonna do this, here's the basis of discussion, here's why it's able to be conducted in an executive session. These are the only things we're allowed to discuss during that session. And when we're done with that, we have to come out of it. Those are the rules. So it would be in the context of one of their meetings, that part of the meeting would happen. And with this law, he'd be able to stick around, whereas everybody else would have to leave or they'd have to leave. But is there some other warning system, not independent of?
It's just the agendas for like school board or select board say executive session if necessary. And so then we get to that point and we say, do we need to go into executive session? But nobody in advance knows really whether there is going to be an executive session. But if the auditor's there anyway, I'm just,
And would you be willing to follow up with VEPC and ask them if they usually warn their executive sessions?
sure.
Thanks. Representative Bodie?
Well, further, I would say maybe it should be incumbent upon VEPC in the statute to notify the auditor of accounts so that the auditor doesn't have to check wherever this is posted and might miss it. An executive session.
That's up to you all. That's,
Perhaps, if we even do this.
Well, let's find out if I think they usually warn their executive sessions, but let's
Yeah,
find out if they do. And if they
I think
do, then we don't
Yeah.
need any additional notice because it'll just be warned and, yeah.
well, let me know if anything should change in 5B.
We will indeed. Thank you.
So another change, page 4 in 32 VSA 3326. This is the cost benefit model section. The previous draft had already said, consult with JFO or its agent if an application has potential incentives of $1 million or more. And you are proposing to add B, another time that would be triggered is if the application qualifies for an enhanced incentive pursuant to section 3334 for a business that is located in a qualifying labor market area. So again, that is where your, the average wage is lower than the state average, or the average unemployment is higher than the state average, in which case you could get an enhanced incentive through the VEGgie program.
Second for you?
I continue to believe $1 million is a very high bar to trigger the additional participation and oversight. For a veggie award, that is to say. Even without the enhancement in B.
Do folks want to lower it more?
Sure.
Can I understand where it came from?
The original trigger?
Commerce.
Commerce.
Oh, well, I would like to hear what the reasoning is if we change it.
I believe Representative Marcotte came in and testified about it. Was that this week?
It was last week.
I don't.
I really have no idea when he was here. I
I
guess it's a
don't,
time anymore, but.
actually, I missed it.
And they said it there because they wanted sort of extraordinary circumstances to, require this. I believe Representative Anthony is saying that even $500,000 would be extraordinary circumstances.
Yeah. And at the time, I think the auditor felt supportive of lowering that and observed that most of the applications are less than $1 million. So the cumulative dollar value that escapes this trigger is quite substantial at $1 million anyway, if the trigger remains at $1 million. Right.
I'm sorry. Do we understand if, like, what I'm thinking about is, what if 90% of their applications are between $500,000 and $1 million? Does that create a workload for somebody that's not manageable? Like, I don't really have a read on that, and I don't know how many applications they get. Do we know?
We didn't actually talk about that very much. I think that's something that Commerce went into really deeply.
Okay.
But we can check in with them. Representative Maslin, and there's a report.
If, it sounds like Commerce may have had some extensive discussions about this that I don't remember Chairman Marcotte talking about when he was in here the other day. So I would be inclined to say, let's understand his perspective before we
Change it.
change it. We could bring him in here, or one of us could ask him outside of committee.
So can you see if Chairman Marcotte can pop up? Thanks. Okay. Let's pop down.
All right. The next slate of changes are in the reporting section. So remember that there's an annual reporting requirement. The charge is to both VEPSI and to the Department of Taxes because it concerns information that comes in on the front end to VEPSI and on the back end from tax after a claim is approved and an incentive payment is made by the department. So under B, in their joint report, the council and department shall include for each business with an approved application. So this is approved on the front end by VEPSI, right? And so now you're eligible if you meet your targets to come back for your award later after you've met your targets. But we're talking to on the front end. Tell us what you are proposing in those applications. And that should include in E here, the number of new qualifying jobs anticipated to be created and the anticipated Vermont gross wages and salaries for each new qualifying job sorted by the following annualized amounts.
And part of this change was because there seemed to be a lot of confusion about the use of the word aggregate. And so clarifying what was meant by that, my understanding from Chair Marcotte, and then changing the wage amounts to better respond to what sort of a minimum wage job was and what just sort of bands that connected to wages a little more clearly. Sorry, back to you, David.
No worries. So you've got those wage bands for both the wage paid and for the job. And then under 3 on the back end, 3A would now call for not only the number of claims and incentives made in the current and prior claim years, but also the amount of the incentive payment made to each business with an approved claim. And then for each approved claim, you'd have sort of the back side of the same data, the number of qualifying jobs and the wages paid for those jobs sorted by the same wage bands. And then for each approved claim, the amount of new payroll and capital investment. Change to the data.
Thanks.
Clear enough?
Yeah.
I have a question. There used to be part of this, in the statute that, and I voted against it, but what it said was that in certain parts of the state, they were allowed to pay less than they would in other parts of the state. So they were segregating off some parts of the state that I felt they were deeming it was okay to make them low income. And they would allow these companies to pay less, like even less than the minimum wage, if that was the going rate. Is that still in there, still here in this statute? You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
It's still there, bummer. Well,
So it's sort of a circuitous way of saying it or approaching it, but if you see the wage threshold is the minimum amount of annualized Vermont gross wages and salaries a business must pay for a qualifying job is required by the council in its discretion. But the floor is 160% of state minimum wage or for a business located in a labor market area in which the average annual unemployment rate is higher than the average for the state, 140% of the minimum wage. So for a qualifying job to count, it has to meet the wage threshold. And the wage threshold is 160 unless you're in one of those LMAs, in which case it's 140% of minimum wage. So that's
so
the
if you're in the
construct.
higher income section of the state, you gotta pay that.
At least 160% of minimum wage.
Okay, and if you're in a lower income section,
At least 140%.
okay, so it is now higher than minimum wage.
It's definitely higher than minimum wage,
Okay,
yes. The debate has always been, if we don't want to incentivize the creation of minimum wage positions, but all right, how much more should it be? And should it be pegged to the minimum wage? Should it be pegged to the livable wage? Should it be pegged to some other wage? This is where it stands right now. It's a function of minimum wage, 160, 140. It can be higher. It says the council in its discretion. I don't know if it ever has been raised by the council, but it could be.
And then the labor market area part that we added the trigger for the extra oversight on, that's also part of that, because there's, in those areas, those same areas, there's more money that's sort of granted or awarded. So in those same areas where you can pay lower wages, we're also giving businesses more money to create those.
to encourage them to locate there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so it's,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. All right, well,
Right there. Quick
Yes.
question on your bands. Why the 163? All the other ones are nice.
Is 163 the last one?
The 860, one goes up to 863, and starts at 864. All the other ones are,
Oh, those are all, I think that's like minimum wage, full-time minimum wage, and then living wage.
I think one of them
Yeah.
probably the 150% or the 140%,
it
yeah.
is.
That sets the floor.
Okay. It's a small band. No, it's not.
That's exactly what it is.
so that should be, if that's the floor, excuse me, Madam Chair,
Yeah.
may I speak again? If that's the floor, there shouldn't be anything in the first category less than 38,368.
Truth.
Whatever it says. There shouldn't be anything in there. Zero.
Depends on whether this is 150% or 140.
Oh, I'm sorry. So the reason, sorry, I thought about this yesterday, I forgot about it. So the less than 38 is if they're reporting on past information, not current information, it would be relevant. Because the floor was different a few years ago. And since these are annual reports based on some folks who've been in the program for a long time.
Okay.
And we should probably build inflators into all of it, but I don't know.
Yeah.
There's gonna be a whole study to rewrite the whole program this summer, so how much, yeah. Last thing should we do in the meantime? Scott, did you?
Yeah, I think less than allows for somebody that's not hired for the entire year or it's a part-time job or something.
Yeah.
If it was full-time, it would be 38,380, obviously.
All right, so 8 here, I have removed the language that said the individual legislative member of the council could request that JFO be supplied with proprietary information. Again, the bottom line here is that any standing committee or JFC could make this request. And it is our opinion that you could make a standing request under the authority in this section.
Okay.
All right, so I am done with those program changes in VEPSI and VEGI. The next piece on page 20, section 12, is a Public Infrastructure Improvement Study Committee.
Tell us about this, Catherine, before David also speaks.
Yeah, so I think as we've had conversations about all of the different existing financing mechanisms for municipalities, we've kind of kept coming back to this question of, are there other different, better, more effective ways to provide all communities, regardless of sort of administrative capacity, ability to navigate TIFs or other programs, have access to capital infrastructure investment dollars to spur economic and community development. And this tees up a group of folks to look at existing programs, consider what other states are doing, understand best practices around smart incentives, and come back to us with recommendations about how we might expand an existing program or design a new program to help address infrastructure needs that all of our communities are facing.
And so I think the first study that Commerce put in is like, what's a better way to do whatever we're trying to do with veggie? And this one's, what's a better way to do whatever we're trying to do with TIF? Which is, I think of it as like we have a square peg round hole problem, which is that like communities desperately need infrastructure improvement dollars, and we don't have any mechanism other than this to help them do that, really. How much scrolling, David?
I'm just looking at how the commerce study is structured relative to who is chairing it and who is staffing it. So I don't know if you want to read through this line by line or if you want me to give you the highlights. What do you want to do?
Do folks want line by line or highlights?
I like mine.
Line by line, please, David.
Okay. Study committee. Make recommendations for new long-term programs or methods to finance infrastructure improvements that will serve a public purpose, incentivize community development, facilitate development of housing, and reverse declining grand list values in Vermont municipalities. currently 13 members, one current House member, current Senate member, secretaries of administration, natural resources, community development, or designees, commissioner of taxes or designee, state executive economist, League of Cities and Towns, member appointed by VITA, member appointed by the bond bank, the treasurer designee, 2 members appointed by the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies.
We're gonna,
Is a regional planning commission an association of planning and development agencies? I just don't know.
we're gonna take a brief pause from you, David, if you don't mind. Okay. Chair Markert, do you wanna join us for a moment? Or just stay in that chair, whatever works for you? Right, come on up to the chair, thank you. We were talking about the $1 million trigger to bring in the legislative economist under veggie. You put in a trigger that if an award was more than $1 million, a
Okay.
legislative economist should join us.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're probably totally thinking about another thing right now. And we were debating whether or not that was low enough. And there was a suggestion from the committee to bring it down to $500,000, but we haven't really taken the time to figure out how big the awards are or aren't. So, what was your thoughts?
$1 million suggestion came from Tom Cavett. So we went along with the legislative economist, what his thoughts were of where that trigger should be.
The questions, Michael, that came up was if you retain the $1 million trigger, how many proposals, considerations are, then would that scrutiny apply to? My recollection was there are quite few, very few in the single numbers that are above that. And the bulk of them are down between, say, 300,000 and 500,000. And so my observation was there would be a number whose dollar value, the sum of the dollar value would probably be quite large just because there are a number of them below the 1 million. And I didn't know whether there was a medium, given the workload issues of having to review those and pay Mr. Cavett to do it.
Yeah.
And that's what sort of triggered the conversation.
Yeah, we really
Have
didn't.
thoughts on that, both the workload issue and having a lot that are escaping that scrutiny.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, you probably should talk with Tom more than me, but, you know, I surmise that there aren't a lot that get above that $1 million, but when they do get to that level, that we should have 2 eyes on it instead of just one. But I think that the legislative economists and JFO are more comfortable with who the person running the model is now than they were prior.
Thanks. Anyone else? Yeah.
Just on that comment, Michael, I guess I wouldn't stop train in the tracks here or something like that, but it's good to know that they're more comfortable with the person running the model, but that's not anything that we can legislate. That comes and goes, you know, from period to period. So it's good to know they're more comfortable with the person running the model. I'm not suggesting we put anything in language work anyway. It's just FYI.
Well, I think but the language that we had put into H10 requires the VEPSI board to contract with the executive economist.
Yeah.
And not, not an economist or another person to run the model from any other place. So I think,
So we're covered.
the executive economist has been pretty steady, and that could change.
That helps.
Thanks. I hope you enjoyed the exercise.
It was a great trip up. Faster trip down. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
Glad to.
Thank you.
You want to come back? Sure. Thanks.
Okay. We were on to the powers and duties.
Sideways.
Indeed, thank you. So the committee shall solicit testimony from a wide range of stakeholders, including representatives of small municipalities, persons with expertise in planning, rural economic development, successful infrastructure programs in other parts of the country, persons with expertise in implementing infrastructure projects, and persons with expertise in related incentive programs.
The thing about small, it's on the paper for the small municipalities. Do you have that defined anywhere?
No.
Okay, because we have pretty small and we have like Middlebury size. So. How about from all sizes of municipalities or any municipality smaller than, so that we don't miss out on the medium, small size cities. Not the biggest one, I'm not talking about the biggest one.
You guys can do this any way you want to do it.
All right, well,
Um,
I just want to be sure we don't miss out on some of the people actually who are in the list
Mhm.
that, who are requesting small tips, because maybe if they see that there'll be some way that they can have an impact on how a new funding source would work. So I don't want to leave them out of the conversation.
I feel awkward because this would be a conversation that would be best
Yeah.
had with
All
Representative
right,
Sims,
we'll
who's
wait,
not sitting
we'll
there right
wait.
now.
And we'll wait till, but
Inclusion of small
Yeah.
communities, specifically what she wanted.
yeah, I get it.
I'm glad that you two sit across from each other, so you get to constantly have this big city, small town tension.
And this isn't about, well, maybe it would be about, you have to have I would say a range, but well, can wait just one second. Because this is a new, I'm seeing this as, it's not a zero-sum game. There are lots of things that we can do for lots of places. All right.
So under 2, the committee shall review and consider how to align various state and federal funding sources into one streamlined rural infrastructure assistance program or fund. And B, harmonization or expansion of existing infrastructure improvement programs, the best method for distributing funding, including whether to use a formula-based distribution model, competitive grant program, or some other process. The report would be on your magic December date.
Thanks, David.
Well, thank you. Apparently you're causing a paradigm shift across the building. It's amazing.
She's looking out for you too.
These little changes. That's all we have.
The committee shall submit a report. Well, this is to the General Assembly and the governor with findings and recommendations for action concerning program design, eligible use of funding sources, strategies combine or leverage existing sources, streamline minimal application, easily accessible to municipalities of all sizes, selection criteria to ensure funds are targeted to communities or region, most pressing infrastructure needs, and outreach, technical assistance, and education methods to raise awareness about the program. Meetings. So this has the Secretary of Administration or designee as chair, and to call the first meeting on and before September 1st. Majority of the membership shall constitute a quorum. Disappears January 15th. Right now, the assistants for purposes of scheduling meetings, preparing recommended legislation, the committee shall have the assistance of Legislative Operations Council and JFO. This is where I've been directed to pause and make you aware of concerns that our offices have about the constitution of committees and the services that the legislative branch staff are asked to provide, and specifically the tension between not having a chair who is a legislative member, direct legislative staff, which has been problematic in the past couple of years. And it's questions about everything from confidentiality to privilege to appropriate cross-branch, direction of services, et cetera. So
I think the task force is all, you're welcome to, do you want to?
I was just gonna say that probably the resolution is either have a legislative member be the chair or to not have legislative staff staffing that committee.
I think that the committee is incredibly heavy on administrative officials and low on legislators. And if we're and having a legislator chair the committee also makes sense as an amendment. But I think maybe a little bit more, we could spend a minute on the composition maybe.
I was just going to suggest changing the balance and having the Secretary of Administration simply convene the first meeting and then have an election and specify who would be qualified to stand as chair.
Well, I don't think that would work for Legislative Council and JFO. So usually.
Just to convene it?
So if Legislative Council and JFO are the staff usually they convene the first meeting and then the chair is selected from there.
Okay.
And so if the administration was going to convene the first meeting, it should be administration staffing the meeting.
Got it. I thought the issue.
I mean, we could make it an administrative study group too, if we wanted to, but then it's not a legislative study group that's an administrative study group and that, would serve different purposes. Can you scroll to the people? Thanks. Yeah.
I was thinking that it might be valuable to have a member from VCRD. I don't know if we can, how people feel about adding that in. They just have extensive knowledge about grants in particular.
Is there anyone that people want to take off the list?
Got two members of the
Yeah,
Vermont Association of Planning.
You want to drop that down to one or get rid of both?
take once.
One? Okay, one.
I was gonna say, I like it because I like having a really good assortment of people around the table because people know so many different things and see things from so many different angles. And I think with a better product, but that didn't bother me, but I'd be out for
We
it.
had on regional development, we could delete one person from that aren't done.
I'm okay.
Are there more people below 12? Okay. Does someone from the Secretary of Administration have to be there if someone from Natural Resources and Commerce and Taxes are there?
I would say no.
Great.
I agree.
Okay, they go off the list. And then should we double the Senate and the House representation?
Definitely.
Okay.
Then would you take one of those members off of Vermont Association of Planning and Development and turn it into VRCD,
Right.
Yeah, that's good too.
VCRD?
Yes. David? Do you remember all of those really important changes we just made? Great. Okay. Sorry to demean or debate here. Okay. So that's done. You're gonna look into the warnings for meetings. Were there any other? Is there anything else about the substance of what they're doing? So I like full transparency, I'm seeing this as like, you know, I continue to think that TIFs are both a square peg round hole, even when it works well for a community, and the fact that the vast majority of communities it doesn't work well for. So like, if you love TIFs, think about how a study would create something that you loved even more than TIFs. If you hate TIFs, think about how the study might create things that you could actually love, right? I think we have all those people in this room, yes?
Just, I have in my notes, we did discuss, I think this was at the urging of the auditor, but it may have been also members here about recordation of the executive session so that even if the auditor is not invited or doesn't invite himself or JFO is not participating, there is a record and it's not people's recollections. I thought that was the substance of what he was saying.
The recording of executive sessions?
You know,
Yes.
you can't record.
I think there was sort of general consensus from the Commerce Committee that couldn't be,
That couldn't?
that it was a camel under the, please don't make me say it. It was there was a real concern about public meeting laws and how we might be encroaching on them, and the Government Ops Committee asked us
Really?
to do it, yes.
Oh, no, you can't.
Okay.
No record of executive session. Can't even take any action in executive session.
I know that. Okay.
Okay, so, yes.
I had my, a question. Now you're back in the room. So,
Oh, yeah.
Representative, so my question about the study committee was just, trying to find it, I'll just look up here. It says, a wide range of stakeholders, including representatives of small municipalities. So I asked if there's a definition of small municipalities, hoping that we have everything from the very tiniest to a medium tiny to a small to, you know, that there's a really wide range, like everybody. I actually didn't go to everybody before came into the room, and then I thought, well, why wouldn't you want it from everybody? But I get that you don't want to leave. I get that when I look at this, I see don't leave out small municipalities, but then I'm concerned about whether there's a question about something like Middlebury. Is that small? Is that Jens? You know, what is?
Yeah, I think, again, the intent was to not exclude, but to say especially make sure that we don't leave off small municipalities, in part, I think, responding to, the discussion around TIFs and project-based TIFs, and like that the administrative burden, or, that only some communities are able to access the current programs. And so as we design maybe new alternatives, wanting to make sure that they work for all size communities, including small, there isn't a definition of that. I would sort of leave that up to the study committee. But if you wanted to further define that means all size communities or
All size.
a range.
All size.
I'm not wedded to that language in any way, but just do want to make sure that we're explicit about wanting to hear from a diversity of
Totally.
folks to make sure that we're designing a program that is administratively manageable or accessible to all.
Realistically accessible to all.
Realistic.
Yeah, realistic.
So in the aftermath of that conversation you just had, what should David do?
All sized communities or?
Could we say including represents from a variety of size municipalities?
Sure, definitely.
That's fine.
Okay.
Small, variety small. I mean, get the point.
Okay.
To a certain extent, we have to trust the people who get this thing going, As long as we get the language there without being overly prescriptive.
And it does also say in the report, making sure that the application is easily accessible to municipalities of all sizes. So I think, again, we're probably hammering it in a lot of different ways, the need to make sure that this works for everybody.
So variety or something, you have that, David?
Representative of municipalities of all sizes, is that what you're asking for?
Yes.
I just wanted to be sure we tell Representative Sims that we made some changes to the
Thank you.
committee as well.
We did.
So, we took out the Secretary of Administration designee. And we took out one of the members of the Vermont Association of Planning and Development Agencies and added a member of the Vermont Council on Rural Development.
Can you explain a little bit more about the AOA?
Well, just figured that with a designee of the Agency of Natural Resources and Commerce and Community Development.
And tax.
Tax, it wasn't really necessary.
Okay, just to share context about the original thinking for including them is, Doug Farnham in particular has become, I think,
Worked on
the expert on the federal funding. And since part of the goal here was to sort of align and maybe streamline with future funding like IIJA, I think having the AOA
Yeah.
expertise would be really valuable and that kind of big picture across any one agency, which I think is why we were.
Okay. Back
Put it
in.
back in. Yeah.
It's gonna be chaired by a legislator though, so it can be staffed and led by legislative process.
We
Yeah.
doubled the
Okay.
legislative representation as well, right?
Okay.
So can you just tell me on that point, do you want like the speaker or the committee on committees to appoint a person who will serve as chair? Or do you want the committee to elect a person from among the legislative members? How do you want that to
The
proceed?
speaker can, or pro tem can elect a chair or co-chairs. I
Okay,
mean, appoint chair to co-chairs.
a joint appointment,
Co-chairs?
okay.
Has that always been a?
No, co-chairs are terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
They just
Excuse me.
switched,
So we're about to pick,
wouldn't switch, they just be.
They can, yes, please, David,
we need
make that work.
to pick one.
Thank you. They can jointly appoint a co-chair,
Okay,
single co-chair.
How can you have a single co?
A single chair.
Okay.
Okay.
Together, they elect, okay.
2 humans appoint one
I've
person.
lost what's.
So the speaker and the pro tem will together appoint one chair.
Have you done that before?
sure, yeah.
Great, okay, so we're gonna do it again.
Okay.
Great, okay,
All right,
okay. We're gonna,
excellent.
I think, stop talking about this then. We have gone through the bill. Representative Sims?
I guess I'm wondering if we want to have space to discuss concerns around risk and whether the other, just responding to the auditor's email.
Oh, around the Barry thing. Yeah, sure, let's do that. And, yes, and we're not gonna vote on this today. I know there was a vote warrant, but we're not gonna vote on it today.
So I think what I heard from the auditor's memo to us all that we got by email was that the kind of original agreement made with TIF Communities is that they assume the risk if they are not able to execute their projects on the timeline and within the budgets, and that the extensions that we're considering sort of takes the risk back into the ed fund. I'm not sure I have any specific reaction to that, but I'm curious what other committee members thought about the auditor's framing about sort of, whether we're adhering to the spirit and expectations that.
So Ted shared, I think, similar number, like Ted shared up numbers with us last time we talked about this, that were, talked about the increased cost of those extensions, right? Which I think lines up with what the auditor is saying. So Becky, part of the language that Becky added to the bill was to basically say like, this can't have, the VEPC can't approve situations which will cause districts to need to be asking for these extensions regularly anymore. I personally feel like they've, for whatever reason, there's a decent amount of gray area in how these things have been proceeding. And I think that Barry and White River Junction have sort of already gotten themselves into this hole And I would rather that we prevent people from going into that hole in the future than say no once they're in the hole. And so I'm really happy to make the statutory changes to try to prevent it in the future, but it seems hard to say no now, but if the majority of the committee wants to, I'm not, it's like, my emotional relationship with this bill is fairly low, so.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. As you can, I don't want to be pleading especially. I did appreciate some of the auditors are to be real clear about debt and what counts and what doesn't count. And I think that's incumbent on the legislature to satisfy his sense of clarity in that, because that has caused some ill feelings amongst previous recipients, not just my community. So I think that's really important. And I perfectly accept the issue that it is special pleading to change, if you will, the template in midstream. And I feel badly about that. And all I can say is we all lived through what you can and cannot do during COVID, and when there's no workers and no contractors to do anything. And that's just the reality of where we are, both communities, frankly.
Representative
I'm
Andrews.
good, actually, my thoughts were mirroring what Peter just said.
I agree on both counts. We ought to have language that's clear that doesn't get monkeyed with as we go forward.
Agreed.
One incentive is. Thank you.
So I know that there's a little bit more thinking that some folks have to do on their own on this and a little bit more research, so we will pick it back up maybe tomorrow, actually. So we have time on the agenda tomorrow.
All of
After the floor.
the issues tomorrow or just some of them?
We're gonna try to vote tomorrow, but we can see how it goes. So I'll put it back on the agenda for tomorrow. And we'll pick it back up tomorrow. Thank you, David, very much. David's gonna make a few quick edits. Becky is blessed to not have any edits and really appreciate everyone's time on this. We're actually gonna talk about CTE after the floor because it's gonna be a very short floor. So, and finish our work for this morning now. And so after the floor, we're gonna talk about CTE and then the Universal Service Fund line changes.